Hello, everyone, and welcome to Worksighted Next.
Hey.
I'm here with Killian.
How's it going?
My name is Adam Devereaux. For those of you that may not have tuned in before, I am actually our Cloud and Security Manager, which is a new position for me, so I'm pretty excited about that. And Killian, you want to tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've seen you before in some of our videos.
On some of the videos, they wrote me back into doing some more, probably because I love the camera so much. But yep, so I run our field and our NOC team here at Worksighted. I've been here about 5 years.
And the camera loves you too.
Hey, thanks.
So we are here today to talk about collaboration. It's kind of a bigger subject because obviously there's a lot going on in the world that it's relevant in terms of how we collaborate, who we talk to, how we talk to people. So really, in a lot of ways, we talk about conference rooms, but that's really just a part of it, right?
Absolutely.
So we also have Matt Maines on with us here. So he's going to be our chat moderator. So go ahead and ask questions as you go along. And we'll answer some of them via chat, and then at the end of the webinar, we'll also answer we'll have a Q&A section, and we'll answer questions live. And as always, Rebecca is our producer in the background, and so you may hear her occasionally as well. So a little bit about the webinar itself. We want to be super interactive, ask those questions. We also will have a survey afterwards. We'll talk about that a little bit, and you do have an opportunity to win a $25 gift card as well. So let's get started talking about collaboration.
Let's jump in.
One of the first things that we want to kind of define is what we mean by collaboration, right? So there's a bit of a history here, right? Obviously there's audio. There's the fact that a lot of our collaboration historically has been face-to-face.
Yeah.
Right? By collaboration, we mean trying to coordinate with coworkers, with outside parties on information, on projects, on documents. We want to brainstorm. There's different, maybe it's more of a messaging, right? There's different types of communication that we want to achieve, but more and more that collaboration is with people that are no longer in the physical space that we are.
Absolutely. And I think that's something, like you were saying earlier, that like in this world today, it's one of those things where you absolutely have to have it down. And there's been like so many unique challenges that we face right now with it all.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I think that this is a part of a larger trend of what we'd call digital transformation for organizations. But the tools themselves, the platforms themselves, they've continued to evolve and change, and what's available to people is evolving and changing as well.
Right.
So really then, which really wasn't necessarily that long ago, right, we were often either in the same physical space or we were on a phone call. Files are saved to a server and accessed separately, right, on a file server, old school. I've got my computer, you're on your computer.
Yep.
And in the conference rooms themselves, there's often challenges historically around accessing that content. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of like the level of technology in rooms later on, because we'll get into some specifics as well.
Yeah.
But now video is a big thing.
Right.
And you know how that is. You're actively engaging with not only your team members that you manage, but a lot of our clients. Do you feel like video has been an important part of that for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things about this slide, as I was kind of putting it together, that I kind of thought about is even like, yeah, some of this technology has kind of existed in one form or another really for quite a while. Like you could say like, oh man, we've had Skype for years, but there was so many instances where we just forced ourselves not to use it. Like we made it mandatory to be in the office. We just weren't comfortable working on some of the new collaboration platforms. And that's again, like something that really this whole situation has really forced us to do is like, well, now there's no choice. Now we kind of have to like heavy ramp up. So yeah, to answer your question, absolutely. Video is absolutely paramount. And there's such a big difference that I notice when having meetings with even webcams turned on versus off.
Yeah, and it's interesting is that obviously we don't know quite what the future has ahead of us, but there's a lot of organizations that are already making long-term planning. Every one of our clients has had kind of a different experience with work from home, with remote collaboration. They all have different planning, and when we look towards the future, it's interesting to even look at the big tech giants. So I heard the other day that Google is going to have 200,000 employees move to work from home.
Oh, wow.
Twitter has gone full-time work from home. It's like a permanent option for staff. Amazon is pushed out until at least January of 2021. And so this, it's a much bigger subject when we start talking about commercial real estate and the offices of the future. We'll talk a little bit about the physical space, because really what we're talking about is marrying the physical spaces and the virtual spaces that we're now collaborating in. What's been interesting is that kind of the return to work and a lot of people coming back into the office for us as well as our clients, a lot of them are having more of a challenge to be back in the building, because now it's like some of the people that I'm collaborating with are here, and some of the people are remote. And so where do we go to kind of have that hybrid meeting?
Yeah, the hybrid's almost harder because, like, for us, we use Teams. It was easy whenever, you could have a meeting with 12 people. And if everybody's just logged in on your computer, then it kind of works. But now we're totally getting situations where there might be 4 or 6 or whatever, just there and all around, just like you're saying.
Yeah, sometimes it's even the like 2 or 3 people meetings that sometimes are difficult too, where it's like, I'm here with you and we need to contact one other person. Like, do we each sit at our desks? Like, I've been in a lot of meetings where I'm literally sitting next to somebody who's also on the same meeting.
Absolutely.
Right? So this is something we'll talk a little bit more as well.
For sure.
But the ethos that I want to think about here too is it is about accessibility in a way too, right? Because it's about those work from home people, those remote workers not being second-class citizens, as I would call them, not being at a disadvantage to collaborate.
Yeah.
One of the examples might be you and I could be here with the whiteboard, right? And we're working away on that. And if we're working with somebody remotely, they can't see it, they can't participate in it. They'll tune out, they'll be discouraged, they feel disconnected.
Yeah, and it's almost like an excuse, right? Like, there's been meetings that I know in the past where it's like, well, I could remote into this, but why even bother? Like, this meeting isn't really worth that, unless it's just a meeting of just disseminating information, where I can just listen to it as if I was listening to a podcast or something. It's useless for me to be in the room, but that no longer can really be an excuse, right?
Yeah, exactly. And really, the reality is none of us are making the technology that we use, right? It's commercially available platforms, and that's one of the most important things to think about is what your platform is that you use, right? So when we look at establishing a next generation collaboration strategy, one of the first things that your organization needs to do is really kind of pick and standardize on a next generation collaboration platform, right? Something that is applied towards everyone. We've seen over and over where 5 users use WebEx and some people use Zoom and some people use Teams, and you're working with, if you pick something and make sure it's available to everyone, it's a far more powerful tool. And then that can help inform your future choices around the technology, because we want the tech to be seamless.
Yes, and that's exactly right. Like, there kind of used to be a time, and maybe this is because I've worked in technology for over 10 years or whatever, but it's like, oh man, we got this cool new gadget, look how cool it is, let's make this piece of technology the center stage and make all of our collaboration revolve around this technology. The problem with that is then it's just in the way. Then you're feeling like you have to use it. Like, I think of different products that just don't work really well, like the old school smart boards or something that I think about, right? Where, like, in classrooms, they were just really clunky, they didn't work really well, the teachers felt like they really, really had to use them because they invest all this money in them, blah, 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 blah. But, now what the goal really needs to be, not just from like a product design standpoint, but as you're thinking about how you're going to be implementing this technology into your office spaces, is how do I make it so it's basically not here? How do I make it so it's disappeared? And that's kind of what we want to discuss a little bit.
Yeah, and disconnected, right? Historically, it was very like you had islands of technology. It wasn't a cohesive experience. So, this is something I'm passionate about. Ultimately, when I bring up digital transformation, this is a word that's kind of popular in marketing terms, but it means something real. And the reality is, the world is still going through an impact, a change from the technology that's been so rapidly developing over the last 30 years, 40 years, right? We look at the PC revolution, then mobile computing, then the internet. All of these things are still having an impact on tons of different industries, and some of them have been majorly transformed when we look at video and the movie industry and everything else. But I would argue that it's now impacting every industry, and then that impact curve has been accelerated by this whole situation that we're in now.
Precisely. And you can even think of examples of, like, if you think about whether you're new to Teams or whether you've your work has now shifted over the past 4 months, what are 4 things, or you can probably name 3 things off the top of your head that maybe 4, 5, 6 months ago you didn't even know were a feature, but now that you've been using this stuff, you've kind of learned them just out of habit or out of necessity, or somebody showed you something cool. Those are examples of things that, kind of like what you're talking about, that kind of stuff is getting accelerated, and we just need to be able to use our technology that much better.
Yeah, we really, I think, run into some interesting situations with remote work in terms of how well the organization is set up with the right software platforms, employee engagement, communication platforms, all those things in terms of how well they were able to adapt. But it's not this perfect world to have remote work. There's still a lot of challenges ahead of us. I think organizations are struggling with a new hire. That seems to be a common theme. But at the same time, there's like Pandora's box is open. So let's figure out how we can more effectively collaborate, have that presence, and have these virtual spaces that aren't really just about a video meeting, but also where we can collaborate on files. We can have other forms of meetings and collaboration and communication as well.
Absolutely.
So we're going to get more into the meat and potatoes of conference room technology, right? So this is just something I've made up, but I like to break these up into kind of 4 levels here, right? And a lot of you may have this now. I mean, in fact, for us, we still have rooms that would fall in what I would call more of the last gen style feature sets. But if we turn back the clock, a lot of times a conference room just had a conference phone in it, right?
Yeah.
A phone, a Polycom, a Cisco phone, whatever brand. It's a conference phone. And what that allowed you to do was dial phone numbers, right? Maybe you could call somebody else on their extension, but it was very much an audio only thing. And then the next step really was getting a TV or a projector in that room to be able to show content to everyone in the room as well. And that means that you have to have a laptop to plug into that, or maybe you're using a Chromecast or some other way of doing a wireless presentation. But the reality is that you're still dealing with 2 separate worlds: the video that you're sharing, and maybe you're dialed in via audio to some sort of meeting room, like WebEx, GoToMeeting, et cetera, et cetera. So the challenge for a lot of organizations was only the users that had laptops could really effectively use that. The tech was not a great experience in all instances. So one of the next steps was put a PC, a dedicated PC in that room, right? Whether it's in a credenza under the TV or behind the TV or whatever, PC in the room, and I have a wireless keyboard and mouse. And so this is kind of an interesting option, because the reality too is like, that's fairly flexible and powerful, right? I can log into that computer with my account, and I can, in theory, get to my programs and files. But the reality is my programs and files often aren't on there, right? They're on my computer, they're on my laptop. It's very hard for a lot of users to use it, where maybe a couple of people in the organization use it regularly, but the majority of the other people don't know how to use it, or they log into it and it takes forever, so then they just give up on it.
All that stuff, you gotta almost show up a half an hour before your meeting, and then sometimes you can't because there's a meeting in there before you or something like that.
So there's pros and cons to that. Pro is, of course, that it's flexible and you can kind of use it with any service, but the con is it's difficult to use. There wasn't good adoption of it for a lot of organizations, and then challenges to get to the resources that you need.
Absolutely.
And when we look at room systems, and that's a term that we'll use a lot, what we're really talking about is more dedicated hardware in a room that allows me to join a meeting, even if I bring no technology in with me. Now, it pairs well if I have a laptop and I have my cell phone and other things, but it allows me to join a meeting, participate in a meeting with dedicated hardware with a more simplified interface, and just join that meeting wherever I'm at. The downside is less flexible, because room systems, it's a Teams room system or a Zoom room system. There are other room systems now, that Cisco, like Teams, which is an unfortunate name, but basically they have their room systems as well. And of course, Cisco's had really expensive ones for years and years. But they've often been difficult to use. So we're starting to see these newer versions, like specifically with Teams and Zoom. And we're going to probably use Teams as the predominant example, because it's kind of our space that we're largely in, and working with our customers on Teams and Teams adoption. So we'll use that as an example. But the reality is that you're most effective using that if you're joining Teams meetings with people. Right. So then if you're joining other meetings, how do you use it? And there's some compromises there, right? If I have a Teams room system and I want to join a Zoom meeting, or if I have a Zoom room and I want to join a Teams meeting, now the manufacturers have announced interoperability, right? So Microsoft has announced interoperability between Zoom and Cisco. So they are supposed to be putting together a way that you can join the meetings with other people. But the reality is that we don't quite know what that looks like yet. Right. So we'll find out more before the year is over.
For sure.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the specific hardware Oh, sorry, 1 second, my battery's dying. It's tech problem.
Yes. So much preparation in something like a battery.
Exactly. Batteries, who needs them?
Who needs them? You do.
Yeah, right now especially.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the rooms themselves, because we talked about some of kind of the history tech, but there's lots of, the reality is it's not just about the one conference room that you have in your organization, right? It's about all of the collaboration, what I call like micro collaboration that has to take place all over the place. So at people's desks, right? So these actually are some ways that Microsoft has kind of broken out their spaces, and on the go is really in transit, in public, and the specifics around this really are about audio and then ultimately your video capture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Video quality does matter, but audio quality is the most important thing.
Yeah.
So when we'll talk about individual solutions that we recommend, obviously a headset is one of the most important things. Something that has good noise canceling, whether that's physically because it has a boom mic and it's close to your mouth and it just doesn't pick up other things in the background, or more advanced headsets, like an Apple AirPod Pro, or some of the other ones that are out there, or even just using like the one that comes with your phone. A lot of times a headset will give you a lot better noise blocking. So that's really important to help make sure that there's good audio quality. A lot of times when people are using their laptop as a speakerphone, what we find is that's the #1 source of like feedback, right? When there's echo and it doesn't sound good, not having a headset and just using your laptop. The reason is because it's echo cancellation, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It lacks good echo cancellation through your laptop. It's picking itself up and on its own microphone, and it's feeding back through. It's very close together, the speaker and the microphone.
Yeah, in general, when it comes to just audio stuff in general, the closer you can get the mic to the source, typically the better, because then that mic can be much more tuned. And mics can be wide open and take in a lot of noise, or they can be much closer together and take not a lot of noise.
Yep.
The things like what Adam was holding up, things that can get close to your mouth, those microphones that are in there can be designed specifically for the frequencies of voice, and also specifically for something that's close up, so that if like a car is driving by, or if people are talking around the office or anything like that, it tends to handle those kinds of things a little bit better.
What's funny too is like some people that had good gaming rigs, right? Good, or even people who are streamers, they were some of the best at having good quality remote experiences, because they were already concerned about audio.
Well, that's exactly it. That's kind of funny if any of you guys had any of that when you, when you guys did go remote, and then all of a sudden everybody's on, you kind of see what their space is like. And for me, like I play all sorts of music and guitar and record and all this different stuff. So I experimented with my microphones for the meetings, but not that everybody has that luxury.
Yeah, and some specifics here too, like this is a Link headset, it's a USB headset, it's one of the team certified devices. So it has some nice controls in here, plugs in via USB into your desktop or laptop. But when you look at Poly, Jabra, there's a lot of other, Sennheiser, there's a lot of companies out there that make good headsets. But it doesn't have to break the bank. For under $75, you can get a really good quality USB headset. The other thing to keep in mind too is like when I'm on a call and it's audio only, I can just use my cell phone as well as a call. In many cases, I don't have to have it on speakerphone. So when we start moving towards the office and at home as well, then we have personal spaces, right? And this is where, again, a headset can be so crucial when we look at like an open office scenario, because I'm sitting next to somebody else, or even with social distancing and we're 6 feet apart, it's still a very noisy environment when you have a lot of people back in the office. So we're very quickly seeing almost this kind of an interesting scenario where you've got a whole bunch of people sitting in close proximity, all on meetings, talking to themselves on the computer.
Yeah, and we've been dealing with this problem for years, simply because if anybody's ever been to our office, we have a help desk, and it's they're all right next to each other, and they're all fixing problems on the phone, right? Exactly. And so that's been a problem that we've had to fight. And a lot of to go back to what we were talking about earlier, a lot of our stuff was picking the right headset for them.
Yeah, super important. Now, there's another option too that can work for offices, and executive offices, I think, is a good example of this, where you may have, it's kind of like a mini collab room too, right? Because you might have a table set up where you can have 2 or 3 people in your office with you, or you just want a good speakerphone experience. There's a lot of good options now with USB or Bluetooth speakerphone devices. So this is another Link device, the CP900. I can just plug it into my computer, and it works really good for if I want to have a meeting with multiple people in the room,
Right.
right? So we'll talk about huddle rooms and things like that, but for offices, these are great as well. Jabra makes a couple of really good ones as well.
And I think this guy can be Bluetooth as well.
It is,
right?
yeah, Bluetooth. So I can pair it with my computer or my phone via Bluetooth, or I can just plug it in and it works,
Yep.
you know, just like that.
Yep.
So these are good for personal offices. They're not good for open offices.
No. Yeah.
All right, so now we get more into like the dedicated spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And what we often are finding too is that a lot of buildings don't have enough of these right now.
Yeah.
Right, so you have to start thinking about where can we enable there to be different shared spaces that are smaller for more of these meetings.
Sure.
Because some offices aren't as accepting of everybody sitting at their desk and having meetings and talking on the computer all the time. It's very distracting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a phone booth style room is one that's typically one person. It's a cognitive space as well, right? We've gone towards these open offices because it's all about collaboration, but the reality is that we all need cognitive spaces. We need to get away and be able to think sometimes.
Yeah, time to think, time for that clarity break, where you do need to close out the noise.
Yeah. So, you know, looking around your office, there may be some rooms or spaces that you can kind of configure in this way, but there are companies that have literally like portable pods you can bring into your building to create these as well. Now, huddle room, huddle space, it's an interesting, you know, different people will use the term differently, but in this context, huddle space is really more the open spaces where you have some resources that people can kind of quick get together and collaborate on something. It might be a whiteboard plus, you know, a TV and a video camera, whatever the case may be. You can have equipment that's kind of optimized and easy to use for you to have these quick open collaboration discussions.
Right.
When we start talking about like a focus room or a small conference room, the line blurs a little bit. You know, it's like 3 to 5 people, depending how you define it. And this is where we start looking more into the Zoom room system. But depending on your organization, if you're all laptops, you know, you may consider even just using like a USB speakerphone and then somebody plugging in their laptop. You know, we talk about it as like level 2 display with an HDMI cord, but it's an old standby. It works pretty well.
Yeah, it does.
But there are some room systems now that really can make that easier to use, more effective, kind of doubles as a conference phone, everything else, all in one go.
Absolutely.
And so kind of the continuation of that is when you start looking at.
Who knew there were so many rooms?
Yeah.
There's so many room types.
This is a little much. I say small meeting room, large meeting room. Again,
we've got 18 slides of different meeting rooms.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a comment that I had. Okay, keep going.
Another term that I use on large meeting room is like executive meeting rooms, right? Executive.
Yes, because they got to feel important.
Yes, yeah, it's the premium chairs and everything else, but it often is size, like where do we put microphones, all those things. So there's a lot of flexibility with systems out there now. Wireless mics.
Yeah, well, sorry, but what I was going to say was like the reason that, you know, you saw Adam and I we have an executive conference room, and we tried to use one of these things and it really just doesn't work very well. We'd probably need 3 or 4 of these. And again, a lot of that comes back to what we were talking about earlier is like a microphone is not a microphone, meaning they're designed for different stuff. So, you know, we can certainly help answer those questions and what they're for, but really understanding what each product is for and the kind of room it's designed to create. I think that's why we're going into so much depth with this, because you can fine tune each of the, like basically the equipment types to really nail down what you need.
Yeah, so when we talk about like a full room system versus some of the newer options that are available, you'll note in these pictures, there's a tablet-like display on the desk, right? Now, the downside to these types of systems is you often have to have wires that run to the table.
Yeah.
So there can be some challenges around that, but at the same time, they are the most powerful at having lots of different options and tuning that audio and video setup to your room. However, if you're talking about the smaller spaces, there's some newer options too, where we look at what they call collaboration bars. So this is an example. It's the Poly X30. Yale-Link has the VC210. Essentially, this is a computer all in one, right? It's an Android-based device. It just goes on top of your TV, and it has, in this instance, it has the microphone and speakers and camera all built into one.
And so when you say Android device, like we can even spin under here, like this little dongle here, this is a keyboard and mouse dongle, right? So it literally doesn't need the computer built in behind it. That's what Adam kind of means when it's kind of a computer built in.
Yeah, exactly.
You plug it in, you turn it on, connect it to the internet.
Connects to Wi-Fi, Ethernet, you got HDMI out. What's nice about these two is if you have a touchscreen option,
Yeah.
then it works really well because I can just walk in, hit join on the computer.
Like the TV would be a touchscreen?
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So that's kind of an interesting option.
How difficult would this be to move from room to room? Where if I have 6 conference room, but I only want to buy 3 devices and I want to check them out or rent them, is that like a viable option, or does that get a little trickier with this?
Yeah, it's a good question. Here's one of the challenges, right? When we start looking at how to make this easy to use, and we look at, say, Teams specifically, we recommend room booking, right?
Okay.
And having a conference room display is kind of best practice, where I've got a display outside the room. It shows the schedule for that room. As these are more hotly contested, that becomes a really valuable resource to know, is this room available? When is it available? Or I can just look in Outlook and look at what rooms are available as well, suggest different spaces.
For sure.
So if you do that, this is actually logged in to Office 365 as a room system account, and you typically want to tie that to the room name. So then I book the meeting in Outlook, I add the room to it along with the other people that are going to join it. Then when I walk into that room, it has a big join button on it, and I can either click that with the mouse, or some of them have like accessory displays, or if it's touchscreen or whatever way that I interact with it, I can hit join and I'm in it, right? It's really easy to engage with in that regard. So that's what makes swapping in and out difficult, and where these are more affordable, it enables you to enable all those spaces. Or maybe, for some of the smaller spaces that you don't want to put these in, you could just start with just even a desk phone. There are video desk phones as well. And we kind of talk about that a little bit potentially here. Executive office or in personal office, there's options now where it's literally a desk phone. This is a Teams device, a Teams desk phone. And I have my Teams interface on here, and I can see my calendar, join meetings, all those things. And there are ones that have video built in as well.
Yeah, and I got to say, that's one of my favorite parts about all this stuff. And even, we utilized something like this yesterday, even getting ready for this, we're putting the finishing touches on this presentation, right? We walked into the room, I hit join on the thing, I didn't even need my laptop. Even if I'm in a Teams device, like I don't have to find the link, I don't have to go back to some email to find some Zoom link. You just go to your calendar, you click the join button, and that's ultimately like what a lot of this stuff allows you to do on a bigger scale, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's kind of the main message here, is there are good options available now that allow you to have a more seamless experience and make it easier for your users to effectively adopt those rooms and get a benefit from them.
For sure.
But going back to that original point of picking a collaboration platform, focusing on adoption and getting everyone to be trained and understand how to use that platform is really one of the main enablement methods there, right? That's the way that we're going to get good adoption, is to train people on it, to make it available for everyone in the right way.
Absolutely.
So, where it's like, well, these 5 people have a GoToMeeting license and they can send out an invite and things. It's such a barrier to effective collaboration.
Yes.
And as we look towards future tech too, it's interesting, some stuff that was announced when we look at like a Teams phone. That's a classic phone with the handset and everything else. There's a couple of devices now, both from Poly and Yale Link, where it's just a display, Lenovo as well. So it's almost like a dedicated tablet on your desk that you can use to join Teams and interact with Teams. It's kind of an interesting device. And then one thing too that from a next gen feature set, we can talk about the fact that there's like some new meeting experience options that are coming out in Teams specifically, where you can interact with the room through the Teams app on your phone so that it's contactless, right? So I can use my phone as like a Teams
like a
remote
control. Yeah, basically, so that if you had one of these set up, you could control it right from your phone.
Or
which is
with
awesome.
voice, with Cortana, which is an interesting thing too.
Yeah.
So
robots are taking over.
Yeah,
they're coming for us.
One last space I want to quick talk about. I would classify this as the training room, classroom, large conference room, and one of the unique features about this is it's reconfigurable.
Yep.
Right. So the tables can be moved around, and this room that we're in is a good example.
Yeah, absolutely.
What we call our bunker.
Yep.
Right. So all of our rooms are named after kind of presidential themes. That was a contest we had when we first moved into this building. Yeah, government themed. So it's really difficult to have a good system in here that's fixed because the tables move, right? So we have to be even more creative around making sure that the sound goes throughout the room, that we can have microphone options that work with all the different use cases.
That we can control it too. I mean, we've had instances here where we'll have small breakout sessions and there'll be a sect of remote people, and when they log into the meeting, all they hear is rah, 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 because there's just a microphone sitting somewhere picking up everybody's noise, right? And being able to control a lot of that stuff a lot better. We've got, I think, our second all-staff meeting coming up that we've had since we've been remote, and this one will be potentially more of a hybrid type situation. Before, everybody was just logging into the computer.
Right. It was, and I think that's a good summary. It was either or, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of organizations, it was like all remote. And then we assumed kind of it was going to be, all right, everybody's back in the office. And the reality is not so neat.
Yeah. And I want it to be in the office because they usually buy us food.
Well, even if you're in the office, I don't know if you're going to get any food.
That's probably true. They've learned.
Well, the interesting thing too, though, is it is, even if your organization is nearly 100% back in the office, like your employees, your coworkers are in the office, a lot of times it's the external contacts that still need to be remote.
Right.
So whether it's customers, vendors, prospects, interviews, you want to have a good experience with those systems.
Absolutely.
Yeah, how do you get a good sense of somebody and their manners and how they carry themselves and conduct themselves if you don't have a good video,
Yeah, that's 100% true.
Yeah.
Can't be hiring a bunch of weirdos, can we?
So we talked about the room systems. Again, it's dedicated hardware, and what I would call a full system. Typically, there's some sort of interface that I can use to control that hardware. Anything else that you want to cover? I think that's just about it.
So what are some things that you've kind of discovered just about yourself over the past 4 months in working remotely? What are some of the challenges that you've faced, and I mean, this is a big question, and this is a surprise question. He doesn't know I was going to hit him with this, but
that's good.
What have you learned about yourself over the past?
One of those interview questions.
It is. It absolutely is. Over the past, a little bit.
I think for me, and this is something we've talked about in terms of asking a lot of the different people here, like, do you like working remotely? Right. And for me, I actually find being in the office was more productive for me.
Yeah.
Right. Like I can do certain tasks at home and do those well. And meetings are often one of the ones that are fine. Right. If I'm in lots of meetings for the day, that's not as much of an issue. But I have 3 boys. They're teenagers now. I have animals, and there's lots of things potentially going on at home. So it's a distraction.
Sure.
Right. So things that I need to work on and think. Working from home is difficult in that regard. But I know a lot of other people have said, it's great. I can get so much done.
Yep.
I'm so much more productive. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's a challenge, is how do we make it so that we have the flexibility, especially not knowing what's going on in schools. Again, my boys are teenagers, but a lot of other people out there have younger kids.
Yeah.
And if they're not going back to school, employers are going to have to work with people, right, one way or another to make that work.
Yeah.
So there's some real challenges there.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for me, one thing that I've discovered 2 main things. One, I love a whiteboard. And I always knew that about myself before, but I love getting up in a room and just brainstorming and like, all right, let's whiteboard this out. I'm very tactile and very visual. I like to see what our thought process is, maybe because I have the memory of a goldfish. It's usually, so if I can get it on a whiteboard, then we're better off.
You're a visual learner.
Yes, something like that.
Yeah.
And then, another thing for me too is, it's really hard to present via even this, right? Like I would much rather this webinar be hosted in a room full of 500 people. I'm sure there's tons and tons of people logged in, but I'd rather it be personal so I can interact. One of the biggest challenges that I've had to, kind of face is when you're in a webcam, even if you have somebody's faces, they're usually not interacting with you. Right. And so that's been a very interesting thing. And that's why I'm very curious to see how the technology continues to evolve and develop to because I know I'm not the only one. I've brought that up before, and other people around have said they struggle with that.
Well, what's interesting is I enabled the together mode in Teams on my client yesterday, and you had a pretty strong reaction. You said you hated it.
I hated it. It just stuck your head in a bunch of chairs. I don't know. I was being a little bit of a baby about it, I guess.
I'll be interested to see if your opinion changes over time and whether that is something that you end up liking and feeling like it's more interactive. For those that don't know, Microsoft Teams has had the ability to create background image effects similar to other platforms as well, where you can replace your backdrop so it kind of cuts you out. Well, according to Microsoft research, and they've done all this cognitive analysis and brain scans and everything else, they developed this new mode that's rolling out right now called Together Mode. And what it does is it takes all of the people that are on video, it cuts them out, and it places them all in a virtual backdrop of people sitting in like a
chairs, basically. Right? Like this was exactly. like a classroom,
an auditorium or something like that. And so you just seeing their faces, and they're kind of together.
Yeah.
And supposedly it's less fatiguing, because that's a real thing. I've definitely found that meeting fatigue is a real thing.
Yeah.
I don't know quite what it is.
I think I have a theory on this, actually. I think that when two people are interacting, there's a little bit more space for not talking to happen, right? Like there might be moments where I'm like reading your body language or doing this, or where, you know, the silences can last a bit longer. But when you're in a Teams meeting, I think you're always having to fill that silence, right? Like the awkward pauses get much more awkward much more quickly. And so because of that, you're constantly talking all the time, which is a lot for me because I talk all the time anyways. My silences are always awkward. I don't know. Like what you're doing right now.
Yeah, I was just going to do an awkward silence for you.
But
I agree.
I think that's what it is, because by the end of the day, like I'm in meetings all day long. But when we switch to this, it's like, man, my voice is tired. Like my eyes are like I don't want to think about anything, you know, stuff like that. The fatigue hit me significantly more.
Yeah, I found headsets help somewhat, but I did find too. So this one, for example, comes in stereo, so it goes over both ears or one ear. I've been using the stereo one. I like it because it's good for music and things as well too.
Sure, of course.
But I would say the one ear is less fatiguing in a way. There's less like I need to get this off my head, after a while. But yeah, sitting for 7, 8, 9 hours in front of a camera and staring at people and having those conversations, I found that video is huge for the relationship development.
Absolutely.
But it definitely can be tiring.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed too is like if I have both over like this, I tend to yell, like because you can't hear yourself, right? So that's like a thing. I end up taking one earphone off so I can hear myself speak. So I talk at normal people volume.
Yeah, use your indoor voice.
My indoor voice.
I'm sure you've heard that a lot.
My whole life. Shut up.
All right, so one thing that we talked about as we get to the Q&A section here was that there will be a survey that gets emailed out. It's in the chat, emailed to everyone who's registered. And if you fill that out, then you're entered in a drawing for a $25 gift card. What is that gift card for? Have you decided? Oh, an Amazon gift card. Gotcha.
Can I win it?
No, you're not eligible. But
I wouldn't have agreed to
I'll
doing
send you
this
some bonus
if I knew that.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Last minute terms. Okay, so I think we're to our Q&A section. So Matt Maines has been answering some questions as we go along here, but let's check in with Becca and see if there's any we want to answer here on camera.
Yeah, we actually don't have any in our Q&A section, so I want to encourage everybody to go in there and ask a question. So whether it be specific to your conference room, what you are thinking about or dreaming about or want to do and wondering how to do it, I bet other people have a similar question. So go ahead and head on over to that Q&A section and put in a question. And maybe before that, Adam, can you talk a little bit more about some of the changes happening in Microsoft Teams meetings? I know you mentioned together mode, but there's some other you've been sharing with us. So
yeah, there's definitely pros and cons to different platforms, all right? And one of the shortcomings on Teams historically now has been how many people can be shown on screen at one time. So that's one of the other changes they just rolled out with the new meeting experience changes that are rolling out to all Teams users right now. And that allows up to 49 people to 7x7 view. They actually rolled that out first to the education because there's Microsoft Education or Microsoft for Education there. So there's a whole kind of wing focused on that. And so obviously when a teacher needs to be able to see all the students, that was kind of the highest priority use case for that. So they rolled that out to those customers first. So now that's rolling out. And once you have that new meeting experience, which is something that you can enable in Teams, if you go up to your face and go to settings, right there in general, if you have the new clients and it updates automatically in the background, there's a checkbox for enable new meeting experience.
Sure.
So I encourage you to do that because I think it's much better. It pops out the meeting into a new window. So you can have your meeting window, you've got your general Teams window, and overall it's a better experience and interface in my opinion. The other changes around accessibility with integration with Cortana, some of that stuff has been announced and kind of revealed, but hasn't really, all the details aren't out, but it really looks pretty cool. There's some interesting videos online too that kind of detail that. But it does highlight one of the advantages ultimately that Teams has, which is the integration to the rest of the platform, the Microsoft platform, right? The ability to store files and collaborate on files simultaneously really becomes an important factor there, right? Like for making a presentation, we will store that in Teams so that we can all be working on it at the same time.
Like we did 5 minutes before this started, where we're like, get the pictures in, get the. Oh,
yes, exactly. You weren't supposed to say
not
that.
showing how the sausage is made, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Just a joke.
All right, looks like the Q&A wasn't actually open, so that was my fault, everyone. I apologize.
First mistake she's ever made. Crazy.
And we have a question. Are smart boards a thing of the past now?
No, I just think they've come a long way, and you do have some competitors too. Like there's the board, which is a thing, and then even like Microsoft's massive tablet. What do they call that thing?
The Surface 2.
The Surface. The Surface 2. But they have that big honking thing.
Yeah.
Is that called the Surface 2? Or is it called the big honking thing?
It's the big honking thing. Yeah, exactly.
So are they a thing of the past? To answer the question, no, they've just come a long way, and like different touch technologies have been implemented and things like that.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, I think I agree with you, and I think the old smart displays have often been a good example of a technology island. And so we worked with like some of the Epson touchscreen projectors.
Yeah.
Right. And those are commonly found in classroom settings as well.
Yep.
Where it's ceiling mounted, and that's one of the cool advantages is ultra short throw projectors. And there's some really awesome like laser ultra short throw projectors out there that are available that they can sit right in front of the wall and then cast a huge 4K image, bright image. But they did have touch capability, so I could interact with it. Well, those systems actually can tie into a Teams room system. So you can connect that to a Teams room system and use that big touch surface as essentially a touchscreen monitor for the Teams room system.
That's awesome.
So it allows you to walk in, hit join, and Teams has an integrated whiteboard, as do a lot of other conferencing platforms, and so you can do, the whiteboard. Though one of the other things too that we didn't talk about is the content camera capability with Teams. So that's where you have a second webcam that's pointed to a whiteboard, like a classic original whiteboard, not a smart board, but just a real whiteboard. And that allows you to be doing whiteboard things in physical presence, but then it pops out for the remote participants into like a whiteboard. And so then they can see that in a much easier way.
Yeah.
I think there's still always challenges with remote whiteboarding. Some of its interface, right? Like if I have a touchscreen tablet or laptop and I have a pen, that's a much better experience. But if I'm just on my laptop and I'm trying to use my mouse or my trackpad to like make text and circles and things, it's a little awkward.
Definitely.
But at least if we can see it together, that can be an enhancement, right?
Absolutely.
So if you are doing your whiteboard thing and I'm remote, at least I can see what you're putting on it. That's what's really cool about that.
All right, similar question to what you're just talking about. Do you have any customers using Microsoft Whiteboard? And is there other whiteboard software that you'd recommend?
Yeah, we use it somewhat internally. I mean, I think it struggles with what I talked about, the fact that oftentimes interacting with a virtual whiteboard just on a laptop or desktop can be a little,
That's why I haven't jumped into it. I've tried to play with it, but it's difficult to interact with. I need to start using it on my iPad, and I was kind of playing with that a little bit, and that seemed to go better.
That actually has me thinking about a 2-in-1 with a touchscreen as my next laptop. I need to get a new laptop.
Yeah.
And looking at like the XPS 13 or XPS 15, but now I'm considering the 2-in-1 as well, so that I can specifically for whiteboard feature in meetings. I mean, I think that's potentially kind of a use case that hasn't been there before.
Yeah,
that
would be the only good one that I've ever heard, I think, for a touchscreen laptop.
That's pretty much right.
In case you guys wanted opinions today. Cool. What's
I think
next?
that's what they're here for.
Do you have access and thoughts on Surface Hub 2 boards? I know you already mentioned that, but
The big honking thing.
the big honking thing.
Hub is the word I couldn't.
That's what it was.
Didn't quite pop into my mind. Yeah. So it's really cool. And they announced some new capabilities where you can have a Surface Hub 2 and a Teams room system, and they can synchronize and you can have different content on your different displays.
Right.
So it looks really cool. They are fairly expensive.
Yeah, they're pricey.
Yeah, that's kind of the downside. Especially if you go all out and you get like the steel case frame and you get the APC battery, it's really a cool solution. It's just, I think, about $14,000 altogether when you add the frame and the battery and everything. Baseline is around $8,000, $9,000 depending.
Would be a super cool investment for like 1 or maybe 2 rooms, depending on the size of your business, for sure.
And putting it on a cart, I think, is a great idea.
Yeah,
because
well,
then you
that
can move
makes it
around
totally
and
worth
use
it, and the check in and out kind of system. So
it depends on how much you think whiteboard value and being able to use that either. So there's two whiteboard functions, right? There's external collaboration with a whiteboard, but the other use case is even just us collaborating with a digital whiteboard, right? So what's cool about the hub is that, you know, I can draw shapes and things and it cleans them up, and then I can export that whole slide and save it, snap content out. You know, it allows me to have a life beyond just text on a whiteboard that gets erased.
Absolutely.
But I think in these times, especially for a lot of small, medium companies out there, it's a big investment. For that same amount of money, you could put in a whole number of collab bars or Teams room systems, or outfit everybody with headphones and a bunch of people with speaker phones. So it's kind of like, if you're there and you want to take the next step, getting something like the Surface Hub 2 could be a really good investment. If you're starting from, our users are frustrated in meetings because they aren't having a good experience, start with basic tech like headsets, speakerphones, a few room systems. Yeah, webcams, that's a good point.
That's something thing. If you can
it's
find
hard
right
to get, USB webcams for desktops, or even people who have poor webcams on their laptops. Yeah, it's been a real challenge. It's crazy.
That's a surprising upgrade, actually, is getting that nicely, but we'll...
Moving on. Yeah. Hopefully that answers the question.
How about touchscreen TVs with a 4K panoramic video system?
Just a lot of big words. I'm gonna let you take this one.
Yeah, so a couple things from a design ethos. I really like having the video be close and personal, right? The large, impersonal from a distance video it just creates a bad experience. It feels like you're othered, right? Like you're separated out from the meeting. You're kind of viewing down, and you don't really feel like a first-class citizen of that meeting. So there are things like the Meeting Owl, the Panicast 3 now. The Meeting Owl is a 180, so meaning you put it in the middle of the table, and it takes a video of everyone around, and it tries to do some software magic and things like that. There are some integration challenges, but it's a pretty cool device. The Panicast 3 is really great for smaller conference rooms, huddle rooms, because it's actually 3 cameras. So instead of did I say 180 with the Meeting Owl? I meant 360. The Panicast is a 180, right? And so you want to put that typically below the display. You get a nice close-in view of everybody's faces. So what's nice about the touchscreen side of that is it makes interacting with the room system really easy, because I can just walk up to it and hit join. I can use Whiteboard. I can do all that stuff. The problem is big touchscreen displays are expensive as well. So that's one of the hindrances. A lot of companies don't adopt those. If I'm in a larger meeting room, like we talk about the executive conference room, that larger meeting room, I'm typically going to have a webcam mounted somewhere, or maybe 2 on a higher end system, and somebody can zoom that in and control it. Right. So that is when Zoom is really nice, because then I can zoom in on speakers, and ideally in some instances, maybe I have cameras on opposite side of the room, so I could have like a speaker cam and a table cam and things like that. But yeah, the touchscreen is really cool if you can do it, if you can find the right tech. Getting anything larger than like 42 inches, that's touchscreen, starts getting pretty expensive.
Sure.
All right, how are you doing Teams in large rooms?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I would say one of the first things that's most important is audio.
Yeah, by far.
Yeah. So let's say you have a scenario where everyone brings a laptop in, right? I want to have a good audio system. So joining a Teams room system, having a Teams room system in there that has effective mic coverage, whether those are wired mics that are placed out on the table at appropriate distances, or wireless mics that allow you to place them where you need them. The audio pickup is one of the most important things. Yeah. You could always have people join the meeting, the Teams meeting, from their laptop with audio off and use their webcam. Like, you can get a face cam view of everyone. In some ways, that almost can be a little bit better experience than everybody being seen from a distance view from a webcam. So that's something to consider. Is the audio, it's my first priority, and then video is really kind of the second. And think from a strategy standpoint, do I want like a webcam mounted under the TV, and so we can kind of zoom in on different parts, or do I want to use something a little bit more creative?
Yeah, and a lot of times too, I think it's important to remember, like, what's the meeting about? Is it a brainstorming where there's going to be a lot of content going around? Is it more of like an L10 style where we're going to bring up an issue where maybe the content is a little bit, I mean, you could have it in a word pad, or it's words, right? Like, it's not necessarily much else. In that instance, you could have the camera with the whole room, and then, what we've done a lot of times in those is made sure that people that were remote were up on a bigger TV, the audio is already set up really, really nicely, because that's the first thing. If that's not in tune, like Adam was saying, that they're going to be checked out of the meeting. But if Adam and I are in a room and we've got 4 other people and we're having a conversation, like I can read his body language, I can see his face, I can do all the reactions. Being able to do that with people that are remotely, having them be able to be up on the TV so that everybody in the room can also see the emotion that they're conveying. I think that's, the biggest thing, is being able to capture body language as best you can.
The nonverbal aspects of collaboration, which is an interesting challenge for sure. And speaking of like the accessibility aspect, one of the features that some systems have, like Teams, is real-time transcription.
Yeah,
and
that's another cool
speaker
feature.
Attribution. So that's a new feature that's cool, is speaker attribution with transcription.
Meaning it'll know who's talking?
Exactly, and it will say, Megan is saying this, Rebecca is saying this, Killian is saying this, and it does it kind of like real time.
The computers are taking over everyone. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. Speaking of the, audio first mindset, again, we've done meetings where 3 or 4 people in a room, one person joins the meeting with audio using a USB speakerphone or Bluetooth speakerphone, and the other people still join to be able to present content to show their video, but they join with audio off and then turn their video on.
Yes.
And that works really well.
And the reason for turning that audio off, obviously, is feedback. That's what gets that really, really screechy noise that if you come in. So
you need to mute your mic.
Yeah, please.
There's some funny videos out there that are like the meeting room, the meeting experience. Yeah. All right. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. If we purchase a Teams room system, what happens if there's a Zoom meeting or other platform like GoToMeeting that the users need to join? Does the system not work at all and have to be bypassed?
Yeah. So with like a Zoom room system or a Teams room system, you have the ability to just use it for screen presentation, right? So essentially the biggest challenge with a Teams room system and joining a Zoom meeting or vice versa is the video. You can still use the audio, right? Because you can dial into the meeting typically. I can use my laptop and present my screen, but it shifts. I can't natively join a Zoom meeting from a Teams room device on the device, so I still have to bring my laptop in, join the meeting on my laptop, and then present my screen. The same as vice versa. Now, they have announced and say that they're working on interoperability so that I could join a Zoom meeting natively from a Teams device. I can join a Cisco WebEx meeting natively from a Teams room device and vice versa.
So the companies are working together to get that done.
They're working together to get that done because they recognize this is a pretty big shortcoming, right?
Sure.
Now, what I will say is that if you picked your platform, right? So let's say your organization has widely adopted Teams and you have Teams room systems and you're going to have meetings with outside parties who don't necessarily use Teams, you can be the one that sends the invite, right? So because you have a choice, you have a preference, you have wide adoption on this, you can be the one to set Teams as the meeting that you're going to be joining. And oftentimes when you're joining meetings that are much bigger, let's say it's this, a couple hundred people in a GoToMeeting or something like that, that's usually where there's less of a need for video in return, right? You want to see what they're presenting and they need to hear you potentially and vice versa.
Sure.
But there's oftentimes less need for them to see you. So just calling the conference number or joining from, and joining the meeting from somebody's laptop so that they can present the screen, oftentimes is sufficient there as well. So it's less of an issue in the real world, I find, than what people might think.
Yeah.
Especially as more and more of the meetings that we have are internal as well, right? Needing to bring in internal resources.
Yep, absolutely.
So people who don't use Teams can still join Teams meetings. People who don't use Zoom can still join Zoom meetings. You don't have to be licensed for either one of them to join them as an external contact.
Do you have any example customers you can demo for Teams versus Zoom versus WebEx collaborations?
We predominantly work with Teams, so that would be kind of the first thing. We've used Zoom ourselves a few years back. We kind of switched, even within the last 12, 18 months, we really switched full-time to Teams.
Yeah, because I think Teams has really come a long way. Teams, when it first came out, had some growing to do, and it's really, really come a long way.
Yeah, and for those organizations that are on Office 365, I would strongly recommend Teams be your default platform.
It's gonna continue tying in to, there's so many other things that you can do just with the Microsoft 365 platform in general. The more
tasks, which is rolling out this next month being one of them, right?
Yeah.
But using a cohesive task to do experience is really going to be a powerful thing for a lot of organizations.
Absolutely.
So there's some challenges with Zoom for us around like, do you license everybody? And what's nice is, you already licensed for Teams, right? So it's a built-in capability and it's so integrated into the rest of the platform. Now, again, with the new meeting experience, the 7x7, there are certain features that there's not comparable, right? So each platform, Zoom versus Teams, I'd say those are probably the two big players right now.
I would say so, yeah.
Zoom has some features that Teams doesn't have and vice versa. But if your organization is like G Suite and you're using Slack and you're using Zoom,
right,
it's a great platform still.
Yep.
It's I'm not gonna dog either one of them. They just have their pros and cons. And we have customers that have Zoom Room systems. We've had a Zoom Room system. We have customers that have Teams Room systems. What we're working on right now is, because of this significant need, is really investing heavily in develop some best-in-class solutions, right? So we're testing a lot of the hardware that's out there, trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work, and be able to help you to find exactly what would work best in your different rooms.
Yeah, that's a big focus for us. Even getting some of our conference rooms to a point where we can demo them and show them off and stuff with different solutions and all that.
Yeah, being a showcase. The challenge too, though, is that it's really more than just the initial install. You also have to think about ongoing training.
Oh yeah.
The training content, management of the rooms, because the last thing that you want is a room to have worked perfectly for a month and then a vice president or owner of the company or something walks into the room and it's broken.
Yep.
Right. It's crashed, it's shut down, something's not plugged in right. Somebody mucked it up right before this important meeting. That always happens.
Mucks it up.
So that's where having monitoring is an important thing too. So having like a managed room where somebody's monitoring that, making sure that it's working correctly, it's getting updates, all those things can be a really good value add and something to consider.
Can you touch on Teams Rooms pricing, standard versus premium?
Yeah, so premium is a really new thing that Microsoft has announced. Standard pricing for a monthly cost. So there's the upfront cost and then there's the monthly cost. For Teams, this is actually a pretty big advantage because a Teams room base license cost is $15 a month, right? But that doesn't include any sort of management or monitoring. So you have to be prepared to be doing that yourself, right? Premium is a new option for $50 a month, which is essentially the same price as a Zoom Room license. Microsoft does some of the monitoring and management on the back end within their cloud platform.
What does that mean? What are they monitoring for?
Yeah, it's a good question. What exactly they're doing, we don't quite know, right? Because it's a relatively new announcement. They used to call it managed Teams rooms.
I thought you knew everything.
Well, I only know what is released, right? What people tell us. So I would say we'll find more about that. I would say that, for us, we're looking at how do we do that essentially as a part of the service, right? So
absolutely.
That you can kind of outsource that role for your organization to us as well.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, it is 12:30, so I think we should go ahead and wrap up. I'm so glad we got so many great questions in there.
Yeah, I'm glad the Q&A was open and people were able to post questions.
Just a quick reminder to fill out that survey. The link is in the chat and we emailed out with the recording here shortly. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone. Take care.